Hello everyone, Burb here. A couple hours ago, Cygames announced a patch that's going to change a lot of stuff on its head about Umamusume, and apologies that it took a few hours for me to do this, but I'd rather, instead of just going and sharing with you the line-by-line patch notes, me, along with some help from Uma.guide people, as well as particularly Team Velocity JJ and Bastende, you know him from the stream as well, we went in and delved into the actual changes and really the effects it's going to have on the game and what they're actually talking about, because they were very, very, very vague in the actual global post. So this is actually a combination. Our 624 patch is on a combination of the 224 notice of balance adjustment pre 1.5 anti changes, the 314 1.5 anti changes for JP, some stuff from the second anti, and some stuff from the third anti, particularly a Gold City change. So that is, they took aspects from all four of those. They're not the complete patch notes of any of those, but that's what they were trying to do, and they were a little bit more descriptive, but we still had to cross-reference it with a few databases as well. Notably, do not worry, this will not affect Champions Meeting 15. You do not have to rebuild your aces unless you want to rebuild with Throne, and the changes that will happen to Throne will not happen until after this Champions Meeting anyway. So this will happen on 7/1, July 1st, after Champions Meeting 15 ends, okay? So do not worry about that. Let's begin, and you'll see the level of detail that we're going into. All they said for global for this change was, hey, the frontrunner strategy is going to behave differently depending on whether it's frontrunners or not. We had a look in the race mechanics guide for this, but basically it is talking about pace up mode. So normally you require 2 frontrunners in order for the frontrunner, if there's a frontrunner behind you by 2 lengths, I believe, you can get into pace up mode. You start rolling wit checks for it. Now, if you are a solo frontrunner, you can go and roll pace up checks if a pace chaser, or I guess a further back one, could be a late surger or an end closer technically, is within 6 horse lengths of you, which means that solo front is viable now. Now, is it good? It's still not good because you don't get spot struggle, but you can at least go and still win the race if you're a solo front runner and you're not just dead in the water. So this will help not only fronts, but actually having the front runner pace up just means that there's less chance of PDMing as well, because when a pace chaser gets within 6 horse lengths, notably it is less than the 3 horse length limit, that will cause PDM. So I think it's sort of a win-win for the entire field because we will get less PDM overall. And speaking PDM, the PDM acceleration, negative acceleration, because deceleration doesn't technically exist, is lighter, which means when you get PDM, right now you basically see your Uma go and immediately just cut its speed because its deceleration is massive. Early race is 1.2 meters per second, mid race is 0.8 meters per second. Basically, at all times when you PDM after this change, it is a half meter per second. So especially in the early race, if you get really close to that front runner and you end up PDMing, you're going to not see your Uma immediately jump back like 4 or 5 positions in like 3 horse lengths. It's going to slowly ramp down its speed more smoothly. The implications of this is that if you were to proc a skill over time, first of all, that velocity skill, if you're able to chain it even with a little bit of delay in between your speed skill procs to break that PDM, you will lose less lengths because you are decelerating less. Also, the velos will also have more effectiveness because you will not have to have as much ramp up acceleration time to get back to the level of target speed required for those velos to actually give you value. So basically, it will be over time easier to chain velocity skills to break PDM. So this is again another way to make PDM less impactful in the game, which I am all for. In addition, the PDM in the mid-race has just been flat nerfed. Right now, you have a 91% early race coefficient and mid-race coefficient, which is really what you were seeing, is that in the mid-race, you were just going and cutting 10% of your speed down, or 8.5%. Now it's only taking 5.5% at 94.5%. So the overall PDM effect, minimum velocity, is also nerfed by about 30%. In addition, if you're in the mid-race, instead of picking a random point like it does now within your little box, if you remember when I was talking about PDMing, each roll has a little box. Before, it would pick a random point at all in this box, which means you could get lucky, but then you would probably just PDM yourself and again pick a different spot, or you could get super unlucky, and stuff like pace chasers have such a wide box between like 3 lengths and like it was almost like 6, 7, 8 lengths at the end. And basically you could just get PDM behind even some late surgers that were popping up because that's where the box is. Now it is replaced by what is called linear interpolation min-max 0.5, which is just saying it's going to be at the middle no matter what you do, which is a lot more consistent, a lot more predictable, and also honestly a lot more fair, because usually even if you're here you still have a chance of winning. So we're normalizing PDM, we're making it less impactful, and having a lot less frustration seeing our horses PDM themselves until the back of the pack. We've also updated some debuff activation conditions, which is really funny because this has almost no bearing on anything, but I did figure out what the actual implications for this is. The only thing that is changing is it's changing from temptation opponent count in front to temptation count in front, and a couple other things with frenzy, front runner, pace late, and end closers if there were not those particular ones. So basically what it's saying is that if there is a valid target in the actual pack itself that is an enemy, that's what it was before, and that would cause it to proc. Now, the valid target can also be your own Umas. Now, they will not take the debuff. However, the implication of this is that this technically counts as a tail held high proc and a Barcarola Blessings proc. Is that impactful whatsoever? Not at all. But it's just something that technically changes. There's a bunch of career event changes that I can't go over right now, but basically across the board, you're going to be getting more rewards for career events. This will be very useful in Grand Live when we actually have career events. Here's a list of some of them that were in the JP patches, but basically across the board, you're just going to be getting more rewards for the various career events that proc during the career to help you out with your stats. The big one in particular is the New Year event at the end of junior year will have increased rewards. I believe it goes from 10 to 20. Do not quote me on that. But it does have increased rewards for, I believe, 2 of the actual things that you can do. For date events, right now, what happens is you have to press date a certain number of times for specific events to happen. It was more of a story thing that if you wanted to go for it, you could go and find all the date events for your UMAs. Now, there is much less required, and it's very close to a 100% chance that you just go and blow through all the different date events. So if there's not a scripted scenario event happening, which means something like in Track Blazer, the end of senior year has a scripted event. That's why events cannot happen. A date event will take the place of the event slot for the scenario. So it does not take a card slot, it takes an event slot. So it is much easier to get date events. You can almost consider a recreation to have some bonus stats, because a lot of these date events, you can look on your particular UMA that you're running, have like a +10 or a +20 or a special skill that they grab in order. So in date events, recreation just simply gets better. Note that the events cannot repeat. I'm going to grab a drink real quick. Sorry about that. It's very late. So also, the crane game, I'm not 100% of this, but the crane game should occur on the first date after Classic Year no matter what. I believe that's what the JP was trying to say. It also shouldn't be able to repeat, it says, as well. But that is still up in the air, but I believe it just basically guarantees the proc on the first date after Classic Year. Here's the big one, and big props and big help from JJ for this, because he's really been looping a lot and he's been waiting for this for a while. But this is a massive parent rework that makes parent farming a whole lot easier. All they said was the mechanics of affinity bonuses and veteran Umamusume affinity bonus are changing. First of all, they are adjusting certain characters' categories, namely Harurara, I believe, is added to the Mile category, which means she gets quite a bit of extra affinity with certain Umas. But that's going to, it's going to change the affinity of a lot of characters. But that is honestly the minor stuff, because base affinity is nice and all. But there is a bunch of stuff happening with shared races and affinity. Here's the text on screen for what it is. But basically what it's saying is this is the G2, G3 update. There is no longer affinity granted from shared races of the G2 and G3, and epithets do not give affinity, which means that if you fail to hit an epithet, you are not penalized in affinity. However, as an exchange, G1s give 3 affinity instead of 1 affinity when shared. And also, there's a checks between each grandparent now as well. So if you're looking for just a all broad encompassing summary, In the worst case scenario, if you're running a mild medium Uma that is not able to run long or dirts, you have 14 G1s available to you for 3 affinity each for 42 affinity for each parent. So that means a 42 affinity parent is the equivalent of racing 46 races in your career, because you have your climax races, your 3 climax races, your debut race, and 42 shared graded races, right? If you are doing stuff right now, you can know how hard it is to actually get a 46 race schedule, and all you have to do is run 14 G1s, which doesn't, I mean, I know it sounds like a lot, but that's just like running Triple Crown and then the Spring Triple Crown and the Autumn Triple Crown and a couple extra bonus races like the Hopeful Stakes and the Tiara, right? The Hanshin Juvenile Phillies and a few. 14 should be pretty easy to get, and this basically ungatekeeps the whole parent farming thing for pretty much everybody right now, because 46 races is just really tough, but really 14, you can just do that in a normal run. Now, in a normal case where you add the long, you get to add the Tenosho Spring, and you get to add the Arima Keenan, which means you have 16, which means we are getting into the point where it's almost impossible to do. We now get 48 affinity, which is the equivalent of a 52 race schedule, which is like the high end of team trials Umas are not even sharing this much. So 52 race schedule for pretty much free from just running a slightly modified ace run at this point. And if you want the maximum and add dirt, which you can do as a free-to-play character on El Condor Pasa with Dirt B, it's perfectly fine, has a whopping 22 G1 races that if you share with 2 other Umas, including a Borrow, you can go and get 66 affinity, which is equivalent of a 70 race schedule, which is flat out impossible, which means from here on out, global parents affinity will be massively increasing from where they are now. Even the loopers are only getting between 50 and 55 races on the high end, and now we have, if in effect, everyone being able to get a maximum of a 70 race schedule just from running the G1 races. If you go and are basically looping this and sharing all your races and G1s across all your parents, and you're able to do the dirt track, we have a maximum of 264 affinity before any base affinity on each parent side. And this is basically what started to unlock the JP parents into giving those massive white sparks that you're seeing on pretty much everybody in JP. There's a couple more patches to go with parenting, but this was a very major one that basically unlocked the affinity from like the 120s that we have now all the way to 264 affinity. If you're wondering what the schedule looks like for a dirt track, this is the one that JJ shared with me. Basically, it's just a Tiara route that incorporates the Japan Dirt Derby, the Champions Cup, the JBC Classic in early November, the Tokyo Daishoten, and the February Stakes and the Teo Show. So it's almost like you're running the Digiton route in normal. Like I said, you can run this on El Condor Pasa, and then if you have any of the following characters that are not free to play, Oguri Cap, Inari 1, Gold City with a singular dirt spark, Marzensky with a singular dirt start, or Oguri Cap again, I guess, you are able to loop because you basically just loop one with a borrowed parent of any of the dirt ones that are run on dirt, plus your other Oguri Cap, and then you basically cycle between the two back and forth, back and forth. You lose a little bit of affinity because of GrandParent self-cess, but if you have 2 characters, you can do the full maximum loop. This is almost completely done, able to be done by a free-to-play player. You just need to somehow get one of these other ones or force somebody up to Dirt C or better. You can do it on Dirt D as well. That's the big one. There's a few other changes, one involving Throne and technically the Team Serious card. Pure Passion has a change. Now, there's a couple of changes with it. The biggest one is you should on average get about 3 to 3.5 turns of the guaranteed Pure Passion friendship. Basically, it's friendship bonus on all of the different trainings. The reasoning is that they made it less likely to end early. They lowered that percentage, so the average will go down. And also, there is technically a buff that when you train with it, you have a chance of it proccing. Before, there was a bug where it would give it to you and then roll the check to end it before you could even see it. So sometimes you would just not get the buff whatsoever. Now, it applies it on the event, which means that it will not be the check, which means on the times where the buff applies during training, you will find that you basically get a full bonus turn as well, which means in Track Blazer in particular, you may even see it on the next turn that you're actually training. They also increase the chance for acquiring a training. The belief is before it was 5%, and now it's closer to 15%. And they also increased the percentage chance for it to acquire over and over in a run. Before, I believe it almost would lock you out after 2 times. So that's not going to change how you use this card. It's just going to make it so that the PAL card is a lot better. This group cards is a lot better. There's a ton of skill condition changes, and this is going to have to be a separate video, unfortunately. I don't believe this is the on your left changes, but this is definitely the BOFA change where it makes BOFA actually usable because it allows the recalc in the late race and makes it so it adds velocity, I believe. Don't quote me on that one. Sorry, I haven't looked into it, but there's just too many skills that are changing for this one. I'm going to have to look into them a little further, but they're on the screen right now. I believe it makes it so certain conditions are actually much more usable on a lot of them. Then we have the changes to certain race mechanics. That's all they told us. Those certain race mechanics are twofold. First of all, they fixed nearly all tracks to be lore accurate. You probably have seen this, especially Tokyo, I believe, was changed to actually match the real life track, but it's almost every single track except for a couple of them. And then they added the conserve power buff. Now, this is our first over 1200 mechanic. You can technically proc it now. You can technically proc it in Grand Live. It's not going to be probably too impactful. Basically what it does is when you are in pace down mode, if you have over 1200 power, you are able to store up that power for later. Basically every 1.5 seconds, you add a little bit of a counter. If you rushed, you're lowering it depth. So if you basically add, you had 6.7, that's funny. You had 6.7 to the counter, and then you follow this massive equation. The big thing about this that makes it not too impactful is basically you're taking the square root of the power stat minus 1200. In even Grand Live, we're not even going to have that high of power. So even if we had like 1250 power, it's only going to be 50. And it's not going to really be that much. We're going to get less than like 0.05 acceleration from this. This will be more useful as it goes on and we have a higher power limit. But right now, I don't think it's going to be too much. It'll just be a little nice to have and a little thing that saves you when you get PDM'd early in the race. It basically converts it into a 3-second acceleration proc at perfect proc timing. It's nice. It's not going to be the most impactful thing in the world, but it may go and give you a few, like an extra length or so over the course of time right now. They changed some skill detail text. I'm sure that'll be in the game when it needs it. You could always go and check any of the databases to see what the actual conditions of skills are. And the big one as well is Gold City is now one of the best characters, one of the best late surges in the game, honestly. Sorry. Gold City right now, her problem is that I have it clipped off. Her condition is acceleration that can randomly proc after 50% race. Because it is overtake, it is very, very, very likely to proc at the 50% mark. And acceleration when it's in the mid race is like practically useless. So this character was basically a 100% gamble on whether or not you were going to pass somebody on the is overtake condition for acceleration. They change it into a 6-second 0.25 target speed ultimate. So yes, it's gold chip alt. This is insane because this is gold chip alt on a late surger with position 4th through 6th. That is a lot better than gold chip alt, which is back half of the pack, because you can overshoot and then still proc this ultimate, and then you're talking about getting into the Pace Chaser pack and procking things like Nimble Navigator and No Stopping Me. This character goes from having a gambling acceleration ultimate into having an ultimate that enables a completely different game plan, and a game plan that late surgers generally want to play, which is to use your backline late race speed by pushing up in the pack and just going and getting an immense amount of mid race. Okay, so Gold City is basically now Gold Chip City, and that's the patch. I know it's been a little all over the place. It was slightly unscripted. This was basically on short notice, to say the least. So I have a plan to make a Throne video. It'll probably be in a couple of hours when I wake up. And then probably after work, honestly. So apologies for that, but I will go and show how Throne actually works. Otherwise, I've done my best. There could have been mistakes in what I said. I'll try to add corrections, and we will go over the patch in more detail as I am actually able to look into basically the skill changes in particular. So I hope this has been more useful than me just going through the vague outline. I know it was longer than most videos on the topic, but I think it was necessary. I'm really, really, really looking forward to the parent patches because I don't have to worry about particularly every single race in my career now. I just have to make sure I'm able to win those races. One thing I didn't mention, and it's coming back to my brain now that JJ told me, is another thing that's really important is the entire philosophy of parent runs changes. If it's not a G1 race, before you had to race stuff. Now, if you get a hint on a G2 or a G3 race, you take that hint for bonus skill points. You still want to run G2s and G3s for your skill points because it's important to grab those skills, but getting the skill procs is even easier now in TrackBlazer because you can now take trainings that have those hints for stuff like Yainu Mateki, for stuff like even your Marvelous Sunday Power to try to get tail held high. You can go and take those as long as it's not a G1. Now, if you miss a G1 or you lose a G1, it's incredibly, incredibly punishing because that's 6 whole affinity for a parent or 3 affinity for a grandparent, whereas before it was just a singular affinity. So G1s are super important. G2s and G3s, if you have a hint or a very, very, very good training, you can consider skipping it as long as you go and you get enough skill points for however means necessary as well, which will be a lot easier when Throne comes out with the 2 skill point bonus. That was a little bit of an addendum. I hope that helped as well. Take care, everyone. I'll be making more videos on this probably for sure. Have a good night. Burbout.